The gunshot echoed through the Montana wilderness, silencing the chirping crickets and leaving only the whisper of wind through the tall pines. Dahlia Zimmerman's scream died in her throat as she watched her father collapse in the doorway of their homestead, blood spreading across his worn cotton shirt like spilled ink. The year was 1878, and in the lawless expanse of Montana territory, justice was as rare as rain in August. "Grab the girl," shouted Isaac Thornton, the cattle baron whose men had just murdered her father. "Can't have her running to the marshal with tales." Dahlia's legs moved before her mind could catch up, her boots kicking up dust as she fled toward the trees. At 22, she'd grown up riding these hills, knew every creek and hollow like the lines on her palm. But grief made her clumsy, and the sound of hoofbeats grew louder behind her. Rough hands seized her waist, yanking her from the ground as she kicked and scratched. "This one's a wildcat," laughed the rider, his breath hot with whiskey as he dragged her back to the cabin where her father lay motionless in a pool of crimson. Thornton circled her on his stallion, tobacco-stained teeth visible beneath his silver mustache. "Gerald Zimmerman should have sold when I offered fair price. Now his stubbornness has left his pretty daughter all alone." He nodded to his men. "Take her to the old Mac Gregor barn, keep her there till I figure what to do, and make sure she doesn't talk to nobody. You murdered him." Dahlia finally found her voice, raw and ragged with rage. "Over land. He worked this claim for 20 years, Thornton's weathered face hardened. "Land is everything in this territory, girl. Your pa knew that, now you'll learn it too." The men bound her wrists, threw her across a saddle, and rode for hours until they reached an abandoned homestead with a listing barn that stood like a wooden skeleton against the twilight sky. They pushed her inside, the musty scent of old hay and animal droppings assaulting her senses as they secured the door with a heavy chain. "Scream all you want," one called through the wooden slats. "Ain't nobody for miles to hear you." Inside the darkness, Dahlia collapsed to her knees, her father's blood still dried on her hands. The grief threatened to pull her under like a raging river, but beneath it burned something stronger: determination. She would escape. She would find justice. Her father's murderers would not go unpunished. She didn't know that 50 miles away, Yates McAllister was riding toward a destiny intertwined with her own. The young cowboy had his own score to settle with Isaac Thornton, a debt written in blood that demanded payment. Morning broke over the eastern mountains, painting golden light through the barn's broken roof. Dahlia had spent the night working her bindings against a rusty nail she'd found protruding from a support beam. Her wrists were raw and bleeding, but the ropes were fraying. Voices outside made her freeze. "Thornton says to keep her quiet until after the land auction," said a gruff voice she recognized as belonging to Ned, Thornton's foreman. "If she talks to the marshal about what happened to her pa, could spoil everything." "What about after?" asked another man. A pause. "Says we should make it look like an accident. Girl alone, dangerous country. Things happen." Cold dread settled in Dahlia's stomach. She redoubled her efforts on the rope, ignoring the pain as the nail tore her skin. Finally, the binding gave way. Flexing her fingers to restore circulation, she searched the barn for anything that might serve as a weapon. A rusty pitchfork leaned against the wall, and she grasped it like a lifeline. Miles away, Yates McAllister guided his paint horse down a steep trail into a narrow valley. At 26, his face already showed the weathering of a man who'd lived hard in unforgiving country. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw spoke of violence survived. The steady resolve in his hazel eyes promised violence to come. 3 years ago, Thornton's men had burned his family's ranch to the ground over a water rights dispute. His father had died in the flames, his mother from grief shortly after. Only his younger sister survived, now safely married to a blacksmith in Helena. Yates had spent those years working cattle drives and hunting bounties, building his skills and saving money. Now he'd returned to Montana territory, not for revenge, he told himself, but for justice. He'd been tracking Thornton's activities for weeks when he overheard a drunk ranch hand in a saloon speaking of a homesteader shot and his daughter taken captive. The mention of the old Mac Gregor place had given him a destination. By midday, Yates approached the abandoned homestead carefully. He dismounted a half-mile away, tethered his horse in a grove of aspens, and continued on foot with his Winchester rifle. Through his spyglass, he counted 2 men outside the barn, one cleaning a revolver on the porch of the dilapidated house, another smoking by the corral. Inside the barn, Dahlia heard the distant crack of a rifle shot, followed by shouts. She crouched behind a stack of moldy hay bales, pitchfork clutched to her chest. The barn door rattled as someone fumbled with the chain, then swung open to reveal Ned, his face flushed with alarm. "Come here, girl," he growled, reaching for her arm. "We're moving you." Dahlia thrust the pitchfork forward with all her strength. Its rusty tines caught Ned in the shoulder, not a killing blow but enough to make him howl and stumble backward. She darted past him into the sunlight, momentarily blinded after hours in the dimness. A strong arm caught her around the waist, lifting her off her feet. She fought wildly until a voice spoke in her ear, low and urgent. "I'm not with them. Stop fighting if you want to live." She went still, looking up into the face of a stranger, a tall man with a week's growth of beard, piercing eyes, and a long scar on his face. Behind them, Ned had regained his feet and was lurching toward them, blood staining his shirt. The stranger raised his rifle one-handed and fired, the bullet kicking up dirt at Ned's feet. "Next one goes through your heart," he warned. "Back away." "You're dead, mister," Ned snarled, but he retreated toward the house where his companion already lay motionless on the porch steps. "My horse is in the aspens," the stranger told Dahlia, keeping his rifle trained on Ned. "Run east about 500 yards. I'll be right behind you." Dahlia hesitated only a moment before she ran, her legs still stiff from the long night in the barn. Behind her came another gunshot, then the sound of boots on hard earth as her rescuer followed. They reached a paint horse that nickered softly at their approach. "We need to ride double," the man said, mounting and extending his hand. "They'll have horses and come after us." Dahlia took his hand, swinging up behind him. "Who are you?" "Yates McAllister." He urged the horse into a gallop as distant shouts confirmed that pursuit was coming. "And you must be Gerald Zimmerman's daughter." "Dahlia," she said, holding tight to his waist as they raced through the trees. "How did you know about me?" "Heard about your father in town. I've been tracking Thornton's men for weeks. I'm sorry about your pa." They rode hard for hours, Yates steering them through ravines and creek beds to hide their trail. As dusk approached, they made camp in a rocky outcropping that offered both shelter and a defensive position. Yates built a small fire, sheltered from view by boulders, and offered Dahlia jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. "Thornton killed my family too," he said as they ate. "Burned our ranch with my father inside. That was 3 years ago." Dahlia studied him across the small flames. "You came back for revenge. I came back for justice." He checked his rifle methodically. "Thornton's been buying up homesteads all through the territory, some legal, some not. Word is, the railroad's planning a spur line through this valley next year. Land values will soar." "That's why he wanted our homestead," Dahlia whispered. "Pa always said our land would be valuable someday, being so close to the pass. Without you to testify about what happened, he'll claim your father's land at auction for back taxes that don't exist." Yates looked up from his rifle. "I'm riding to Fort Benton tomorrow to see the federal marshal. Will you come with me?" "To what end? Men like Thornton own the local law." Her voice hardened. "I don't want justice, I want revenge. Those are dangerous words, Miss Zimmerman. These are dangerous times, Mr. McAllister." The night deepened around them, the fire burning down to embers. Dahlia wrapped herself in the blanket Yates offered, but sleep evaded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father falling, heard the gunshot that had shattered her world. "My mother was Apache," she said suddenly into the darkness, not sure if Yates was still awake. "She died when I was 14, fever. Pa raised me alone after that, taught me to shoot, to hunt, to survive." She traced patterns in the dirt with a stick. "The townsfolk never fully accepted us because of her. Now they'll believe whatever lies Thornton tells about Pa's death." Yates was silent so long she thought he might be sleeping, but finally he spoke. "My father was Irish, came over during the famine as a boy, worked cattle drives until he saved enough for our ranch. He believed in this country's promise." A bitter edge crept into his voice. Men like Thornton perverted that promise. They think their money puts them above law and decency. What do we do now? Dahlia asked. We survive the night, Yates replied. Then we make a plan. Dawn broke with no sign of pursuit, though both knew it would come. They ate a cold breakfast and rode west rather than north toward Fort Benton. Yates explaining that they needed to circle around to avoid the main trails where Thornton's men would be watching. As they crested a hill overlooking a vast expanse of prairie, Dahlia noticed a column of smoke in the distance. What's that? Yates frowned, studying the horizon. Looks to be near Wilson Creek Settlement. Small place, mostly miners and a trading post. They changed course, approaching cautiously. As they drew closer, the acrid smell of burning timber reached them. Tying their horse in a stand of trees, they continued on foot until they reached the edge of what had been a small collection of buildings. The settlement was smoldering ruins. Bodies lay in the street, men, women, a child. Dahlia pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting nausea. Thornton, Yates said grimly, kneeling to examine a body. These folks were shot before the buildings were torched. This wasn't Indians or bandits, too deliberate. But why? Dahlia whispered. These were just ordinary people. I'd wager some of them saw what happened at your homestead. Thornton's eliminating witnesses. He stood, his face grim. We need to leave, they could still be nearby. They retreated to their horse, but as they mounted, gunfire erupted from the trees to their right. A bullet splintered the trunk beside Dahlia's head. Yates kicked his horse into a gallop, one arm holding Dahlia secure as they raced for cover. How many? She gasped as they plunged into a ravine. At least 3, Yates replied, guiding the horse along the rocky streambed. They were waiting for us. It's my fault, Dahlia said. I should have seen it was a trap. No time for blame, we need to find somewhere defensible. They rode hard through the afternoon, the sound of pursuit sometimes fading, sometimes drawing nearer. Yates's horse began to tire, lathered with sweat and breathing heavily under its double burden. As twilight approached, they reached a steep hillside dotted with caves and rock formations. We'll make our stand there, Yates said, pointing to a cave entrance halfway up the slope. Horse can't go much further anyway. They dismounted, Yates taking his rifle and ammunition while Dahlia gathered what supplies she could carry. They climbed the rocky slope as the last light faded, reaching the cave just as darkness enveloped the land. The cave was shallow but defensible, with a narrow entrance that offered a clear view of the approach. Yates positioned himself near the opening, rifle ready, while Dahlia arranged their meager supplies. How did you know where to find me? She asked, the question that had been nagging since their escape. Yates kept his eyes on the darkness outside. I've been tracking Thornton since I came back to the territory. I was in Cutbank when I overheard 2 of his men talking about a job at the Zimmerman place. I tried to get there in time. His voice dropped. I'm sorry I wasn't faster. You saved my life, Dahlia said softly. Don't apologize for that. A silence fell between them, broken only by the distant cry of a coyote. Finally, Yates spoke again. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. Wake me in a few hours, she insisted. You need rest too, he nodded, though she suspected he had no intention of waking her. Dahlia leaned back against the cool stone wall. Exhaustion finally claiming her. Her dreams were chaotic, her father calling her name, flames licking at the walls of their cabin, Thornton's face leering at her through smoke. She woke with a gasp to find early morning light filtering into the cave. Yates was still at his post, though his posture showed the fatigue of a sleepless night. You didn't wake me, she accused. You needed the rest more, he said simply. And they're out there, 3 riders at the base of the hill making camp. They're waiting for us to come down. Dahlia crawled to the entrance and peered out. Sure enough, 3 men had established a small camp at the bottom of the slope, effectively trapping them on the hillside. We have enough water for maybe 2 days, Yates said, indicating their canteens. Food for less, they know it. They'll wait us out, or they'll get impatient and try to flush us out, Dahlia countered. Either way, we need a plan. Yates checked his ammunition. I count 18 rounds for the Winchester, 12 for the revolver, not enough for a prolonged fight. Then we need to make each shot count. Dahlia's eyes narrowed as she studied the terrain. Or find another way out. They spent the morning examining the cave, discovering that it extended further back than they'd initially thought. A narrow passage at the rear led to a series of smaller chambers, and in the furthest one, a crack in the ceiling let in a shaft of sunlight. "This might lead to the other side of the hill," Dahlia said, studying the opening. It was narrow but possibly wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Yates frowned. "Too risky. We don't know where it leads and you could get stuck." "We don't have many options," she reminded him. "And I'm smaller than you. I could get through, circle around behind them. And then what? There are 3 armed men down there. I could create a distraction." "Draw them away so you can get to the horse." Yates shook his head. "I'm not letting you risk yourself like that." "It's not your decision to make," Dahlia said firmly. "My father died because of Thornton. I won't be the next victim." They argued in hushed voices, aware that sound could carry to their pursuers below. Finally, Yates relented, recognizing the determination in Dahlia's eyes. "If you're not back by nightfall, I'm coming after you," he warned. "Fair enough." She removed her boots and outer shirt, leaving her in a thin cotton camisole that would allow her to move more easily through the narrow passage. "And Yates, if I don't make it, make sure Thornton pays for what he did." He caught her wrist as she turned to go. "You'll make it. We both will." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection forged in shared loss and danger. On impulse, Dahlia leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard against her skin. "For luck," she whispered, then turned and began to climb toward the opening. The passage was tighter than it had appeared, the rocks scraping her shoulders and catching at her hair. Several times she had to stop, control her breathing, and push through waves of claustrophobia. The only light came from the opening above, growing brighter as she ascended. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, she reached the surface, pulling herself out onto a rocky ledge on the far side of the hill. The afternoon sun was warm on her skin as she oriented herself. Their cave was on the southern face. She had emerged on the northern side, with a clear path down to the valley floor. Moving cautiously, Dahlia descended, keeping to cover where possible. She circled wide around the hill, approaching the men's camp from the west, where a small stand of trees provided concealment. Close enough now to hear their voices, she counted 3 men: Ned, the foreman she'd stabbed with the pitchfork, and 2 others she didn't recognize. "Thornton wants the girl alive if possible," Ned was saying, his shoulder bandaged roughly. "Said she might be useful as leverage for that land." "And the man?" asked one of the others. "Kill him. He's caused enough trouble." Dahlia retreated into the trees, mind racing. She needed a distraction big enough to draw them away from the hillside, but not so dangerous as to risk Yates's escape. Her eyes fell on their hobbled horses, grazing a short distance from the camp. Carefully, she worked her way toward the animals. Horses had always responded well to her, a gift from her mother, her father used to say. She approached the nearest one, a dappled gray, and spoke in soft tones as she reached for its lead rope. The horse nickered softly but didn't shy away. With deft fingers, she untied the hobble, then moved to the next horse. Within minutes, all 3 were free. Dahlia picked up a dead branch, took a deep breath, and stepped out where the men could see her. "Looking for me," she called, then slapped the nearest horse hard on the rump with the branch. The startled animal bolted, the others following suit. The men scrambled to their feet, reaching for weapons as Dahlia darted back into the trees. "There she is," shouted Ned. "Get her." 2 of the men gave chase while Ned, hampered by his injured shoulder, tried unsuccessfully to catch one of the fleeing horses. Dahlia ran, leading her pursuers away from the hillside, zigzagging through the trees to make herself a difficult target. A bullet splintered bark near her head, another kicked up dirt at her heels. She pushed herself harder, lungs burning, the sound of pursuit close behind. At a fork in the path, she veered left, then immediately doubled back and took the right fork, momentarily confusing her pursuers. She found herself at the edge of a shallow ravine. Without hesitation, she slid down the embankment, using trees and bushes to control her descent. At the bottom, she pressed herself flat in the shelter of a fallen log, trying to quiet her labored breathing. Voices above indicated the men had reached the ravine's edge. "She went down there," one said. "I'm not climbing down that," replied the other. "We'll go around, cut her off at the other end." Their footsteps retreated, giving Dahlia a momentary reprieve. She stayed hidden, counting to 100 before carefully making her way back up the opposite side of the ravine. Once at the top, she began circling back toward the hill where Yates waited. Meanwhile, Yates had been watching the commotion from the cave entrance. When he saw two men chase Dahlia into the woods and Ned struggle with the horses, he knew this was the opportunity they'd been waiting for. Gathering their few belongings, he made his way down the hillside, keeping to cover whenever possible. Ned spotted him just as he reached the bottom. "You!" he shouted, drawing his pistol despite his injured shoulder. Yates was faster. His first shot caught Ned in the leg, dropping the man to one knee. His second struck Ned's good shoulder, ensuring he couldn't raise his weapon. Approaching cautiously, Yates kicked Ned's fallen pistol away. "Where's Thornton?" he demanded. Ned laughed through gritted teeth. "You think I'd tell you he'll kill me slower than you would?" "I'm not going to kill you," Yates said, "but I'll leave you here without a horse or water if you don't start talking." Fear flickered in Ned's eyes. He knew what that meant in this country. He's at the Circle T Ranch, planning to ride to the county seat tomorrow for the land auction. Is the marshal in his pocket too? Ned hesitated, then nodded. Judge Franklin as well. Whole things arranged. Zimmerman land will go to Thornton for back taxes. Nothing you can do about it. Yates found rope in one of the abandoned saddlebags and bound Ned securely to a tree. "Your friends will find you eventually," he said, "if the wolves don't first." He was preparing to go after Dahlia when she emerged from the trees, breathless and scratched but otherwise unharmed. The relief that flooded through him was surprisingly intense. "You're all right," he said, crossing to her in quick strides. "I lost them in the ravine," she explained, then noticed Ned tied to the tree. "You got him. And information." Yates quickly told her what Ned had revealed about Thornton's plans. "The land auction is tomorrow. If we ride hard, we might make it in time." "To do what?" "You said yourself the marshal and judge are corrupt." "To get evidence," Yates said. "I've been gathering it for months. Affidavits from homesteaders Thornton drove out, records of falsified deeds. It's in a lockbox in Fort Benton. We need to get it and find someone honest to show it to." "The territorial governor," Dahlia suggested. "He's been trying to clean up corruption before Montana applies for statehood." They found Yates's paint horse where they'd left it, and one of Ned's men's horses had returned after the initial panic. With two mounts now, they could travel faster. They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, stopping only to rest the horses and eat a cold meal from their dwindling supplies. As they rode, Yates told Dahlia more about his investigation into Thornton's activities. "He's not just after land. He's been running a protection racket against smaller ranchers, rustling cattle from those who won't pay, even arranging accidents for people who stand in his way." "Like my father," Dahlia said softly, "and mine." Yates's jaw tightened, but Thornton's gotten careless. "Too many dead homesteaders, too much land changing hands too quickly. People are starting to talk, even if they're afraid to act." They made camp that night in a secluded grove, both too exhausted for more than a few hours of travel. As they sat beside a small fire, Dahlia found herself studying Yates's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the scar that spoke of past violence, the weariness that seemed to have settled into his very bones. "Why did you really come back?" she asked. "You could have started over somewhere else, somewhere safe." Yates was silent for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "I tried that, worked cattle drives in Wyoming, even went to California for a spell, but the nightmares followed me." He met her eyes across the flames. "Some debts can only be paid in person. And after, when Thornton faces justice, what then? Never thought much beyond that," he admitted. "Maybe go back to ranching. My family's land is gone, but there's plenty of country still open." "My land isn't gone yet," Dahlia said quietly. "If we stop Thornton, it's still mine. A woman can run a ranch as well as a man." Something flickered in Yates's eyes, admiration, perhaps, or something deeper. "I believe you could run it better than most men I've known." They reached Fort Benton by mid-morning the next day, the small frontier town bustling with activity along the Missouri River. Yates led them to a nondescript boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Hollister, who greeted him with surprise and concern. "Mr. McAllister. I'd heard you were back in the territory, but didn't expect to see you in town with Thornton's men about." We need to retrieve something from my room, Yates explained, and perhaps clean up a bit if you have water to spare, Mrs. Hollister ushered them inside, eyeing Dahlia's dirt-streaked face and torn clothing with motherly concern. Of course, and who might this young lady be? Dahlia Zimmerman, Yates said. She's with me. Something in his tone made the older woman nod without further questions. She showed them to a small room at the back of the house, brought water for washing and clean clothes that had belonged to her late husband and daughter. The land auction's at 3 o'clock, she informed them as she set down a tray with bread, cheese, and coffee. Thornton rode in this morning with 6 men, all armed. They're at the Frontier Saloon now. And the marshal? Yates asked. Drinking with them, Mrs. Hollister said grimly. As usual, when she'd gone, Yates knelt by the bed, pulling up a floorboard to reveal a metal box. From it, he extracted a packet of papers tied with string. Affidavits from 20 homesteaders Thornton drove out, he explained, showing Dahlia. Bank records showing suspicious deposits to both Marshal Hayes and Judge Franklin's accounts after Thornton acquired disputed properties. And this, he held up a letter, from the Territorial Governor's Office acknowledging receipt of my initial complaints and promising investigation. Will it be enough? Dahlia asked, scanning the documents. With your testimony about your father's murder, it should be. Yates hesitated. But the governor himself isn't here. His representative, a man named Ellis, arrived yesterday for the auction. We'll need to convince him first. Clean, fed, and with fresh clothes, they felt somewhat renewed as they made their way to the courthouse where the auction would be held. Dahlia wore Mrs. Hollister's daughter's dress, her hair pinned up beneath a bonnet that shadowed her face. Yates had shaved his beard, changing his appearance enough that a casual observer might not immediately recognize him. The courthouse was crowded. Local ranchers and businessmen gathered for what promised to be a significant auction. Thornton sat near the front, surrounded by his men, confidence evident in his posture. Near him sat Marshal Hayes and Judge Franklin, both looking prosperous in suits that belied their government salaries. Yates spotted a lean, bespectacled man he took to be Ellis, the governor's representative, sitting alone at a small table, reviewing papers. They approached him cautiously. Mr. Ellis, Yates kept his voice low. My name is Yates McAllister. I've corresponded with the governor's office about Isaac Thornton. Ellis looked up, recognition dawning in his eyes. Mr. McAllister, we'd begun to think you might not appear. Your letters were concerning. I have evidence, Yates said, indicating the packet of papers. And a witness to murder. Ellis glanced at Dahlia, then back to Yates. Miss Zimmerman, I presume, we received telegraph inquiries about your father's death. The local marshal reported it as an accident. It was murder, Dahlia said firmly. Thornton shot him in cold blood when he refused to sell our land. Then his men took me captive to prevent me from testifying. Ellis frowned. These are serious allegations. Do you have proof beyond your word? We have these, Yates said, passing over the documents. And the testimony of 20 families Thornton has threatened or driven out. As Ellis began to review the papers, the door to the courthouse banged open. One of Thornton's men entered, scanning the crowd, and his eyes locked on Dahlia and Yates. They're here, he shouted, drawing his pistol. The Zimmerman girl and McAllister. Chaos erupted. Thornton and his men jumped to their feet, reaching for weapons. The marshal moved to intercept Yates and Dahlia, his hand on his gun. Stop, Ellis's voice cut through the commotion. He had risen to his feet, the governor's seal visible on documents in his hand. This is an official territorial proceeding. Put away your weapons immediately. The marshal hesitated, looking to Thornton for direction. The cattle baron's face had darkened with rage. That man is wanted for murder, Thornton declared, pointing at Yates. And the girl is deranged with grief. They've been spreading lies about me throughout the territory. Interesting, Ellis said coolly. Because I have sworn affidavits here suggesting that you, Mr. Thornton, are responsible for numerous crimes including murder, extortion, and land theft. He turned to the marshal. And evidence that you, Marshal Hayes, have been complicit in covering up these crimes. The marshal's hand dropped from his gun. Now wait just a minute. Gerald Zimmerman was murdered 3 days ago, Ellis continued. His daughter witnessed it. Yet you reported it as an accident without even visiting the scene. He turned to the crowd. Is this the kind of justice Montana Territory can expect if granted statehood? A murmur ran through the assembled citizens. Thornton's confidence visibly wavered. This auction is suspended pending investigation, Ellis announced. And I am temporarily deputizing several men to ensure order is maintained until the governor's full investigative team arrives. He nodded to several burly men at the back of the room, who stepped forward, not local cowboys, Dahlia realized, but professional lawmen who had been waiting for this moment. Thornton's face contorted with fury. With surprising speed for a man his age, he drew his revolver and aimed it directly at Dahlia. You should have stayed locked up, girl. Yates moved instinctively, pushing Dahlia behind him as shots rang out. Pain exploded in his shoulder as Thornton's bullet found its mark, but he remained standing, shielding Dahlia with his body. The governor's men had drawn their weapons, and in the exchange of gunfire that followed, Thornton was hit twice. He collapsed to the courthouse floor, blood spreading across his expensive vest. Several of his men surrendered immediately, others tried to flee and were quickly apprehended. Yates, Dahlia cried, supporting him as he staggered. You're hit. Just the shoulder, he grunted, though his face had gone pale. Is Thornton dead? Confirmed one of Ellis's men, checking the cattle baron's pulse. Justice of a sort. The following days passed in a blur. A doctor in Fort Benton extracted the bullet from Yates's shoulder and declared him lucky the wound was painful, but had missed any vital structures. Dahlia refused to leave his side during his recovery, sleeping in a chair beside his bed at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house. Ellis and his team took statements from Dahlia, Yates, and numerous other witnesses. Marshal Hayes and Judge Franklin were arrested, along with several of Thornton's men. The territorial governor himself arrived to oversee the proceedings, determined to show that Montana was ready for the rule of law that statehood would require. Your father's land remains yours, Miss Zimmerman, the governor informed Dahlia when he visited Yates's sickroom. And there will be reparations from Thornton's estate for the damages you've suffered. What about the people of Wilson Creek? She asked, remembering the burned settlement and its murdered inhabitants. Justice will be served there as well, he assured her. Though nothing can bring back those lives. And my family's ranch, Yates asked from his bed. The deed was illegally transferred, the governor confirmed. It will be returned to you as the rightful heir, Mr. McAllister, though I understand there's not much left of the buildings. As the governor took his leave, Dahlia sat beside Yates's bed, taking his hand in hers. So you'll have your land back, she said softly. Land without a home isn't much use, he replied, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. You could rebuild. It would take time, resources. I have a home, Dahlia said hesitantly. It needs work, but the foundations are sound, and it's too big for just one person. Yates's eyes met hers, a question in their depths. Dahlia Zimmerman, are you proposing a business arrangement? A smile tugged at her lips. Perhaps something more than business, Yates McAllister. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I think we should discuss terms, he murmured, once I'm back on my feet. I'm a fair negotiator, she warned him, leaning closer. And I know the value of what I'm offering. So do I, he said softly, his free hand coming up to cradle her cheek. More than you know. Their first kiss was gentle, mindful of his injuries but filled with promise. When they parted, Dahlia rested her forehead against his, eyes closed, savoring the moment. They locked me in that barn to keep me quiet, she whispered. But they didn't count on you. When I saw the barn, saw what they'd done, Yates admitted, I set it on fire as a signal to you to let you know you weren't alone. I told you then you'd speak again, that your voice would be heard. And now Thornton has paid the price, she said, for both our families. 2 months later, Dahlia stood on the porch of her family's rebuilt cabin, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. The homestead was coming back to life, fields planted, cattle grazing on the hillsides, a new barn rising where the old one had stood. Yates emerged from the cabin, his arm still in a sling but healing well. He wrapped his good arm around her waist, pulling her close as they surveyed their domain. Mrs. Hollister sent a telegram, he said. "The trial's over. Hayes got 15 years, Franklin 10. The rest of Thornton's men got various sentences. It's really over then," Dahlia murmured, leaning into his strength. "One chapter is. Ours is just beginning." She turned in his embrace, looking up into the face that had become beloved in so short a time. The scar that had once seemed fearsome now struck her as simply part of him, a mark of survival. "Are you sure you want this life?" she asked. "A small homestead, hard work, just the two of us against everything nature can throw at us." "I've never been more sure of anything," he replied, bending to kiss her softly. "Though I hope it won't always be just the two of us." Dahlia smiled against his lips. "Someday," she agreed, "when the time is right." As darkness fell across the land, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. Two survivors who had found in each other not just justice or revenge, but something far more precious, a future, built from the ashes of their past. 1 year to the day after Thornton's death, Dahlia McAllister stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching her husband return from town with supplies. Her hand rested on the slight swell of her belly, evidence of the new life they had created together. Their ranch had prospered beyond expectations. With the railroad spur line now confirmed, the value of their combined lands had increased dramatically. They had used some of the reparation money to purchase additional adjacent acreage, expanding their operation. Yates had proven as skilled at ranching as he had at seeking justice, and Dahlia's knowledge of the local terrain and conditions made them formidable partners. "You're looking pleased with yourself," Yates observed as he dismounted, carrying packages up to the porch. "I was just thinking," Dahlia said, accepting his kiss, "about how far we've come in a year. And how far we have yet to go." He placed a gentle hand on her stomach. "Little one keeping you up at night, just active in the afternoons," she smiled, "like someone else I know." That evening, as they sat before the fireplace in the home they had built together, Yates revealed the contents of one of the packages. He'd brought a journal bound in soft leather. "For you," he said, placing it in her hands, "to record our story, for the little one someday." Dahlia ran her fingers over the smooth cover. "Where would I begin?" "At the beginning," Yates suggested, "with a young woman whose voice couldn't be silenced even when they locked her in a barn to keep her quiet." She leaned against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that their story, born in fire and grief, had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to resilience, justice, and love that had bloomed in the wild heart of the Montana Territory.